Every zombie movie promises you a fighting chance. Most of them are lying. So today, I'm ranking every major zombie movie by how long you'd actually survive, from the worst odds to the most livable apocalypses, starting at rock bottom. Rexy, imagine being trapped inside a 4-story Barcelona apartment building with 0 exits, 0 weapons, and an infection that turns people violently aggressive within minutes. That's Rexy, and it is the single most hopeless zombie scenario ever put on film. A news crew follows firefighters into a residential building on a routine call. Then the Spanish health authorities seal every exit from the outside. No warning, no negotiation, just welded shut. You're locked in a concrete box with something that spreads through saliva, and it moves fast. But here's where it gets truly hopeless. The final scene reveals that a possessed girl had been deliberately hidden in the penthouse attic by a Vatican priest. The source of the entire infection was already inside the building before anyone walked through the front door. The whole apartment was a sealed coffin, and nobody knew it. Your estimated survival time? 8 to 15 minutes. And that's being generous. 4 floors, locked doors, and an infection that spreads faster than you can climb a staircase. Which is, not ideal. But if Reese gives you minutes, the next film gives you something slightly more generous. And by slightly, I mean you might survive long enough to regret every decision you've ever made. Resident Evil. So, REC trapped you in a building with 0 weapons and 0 training. Resident Evil says, fine, here's a commando team with full military gear and an underground laboratory. You still die in under 2 hours. The Hive is a massive research facility beneath Raccoon City, where the Umbrella Corporation cooked up biological weapons. When the T-virus leaks, the facility's AI, the Red Queen, doesn't call for help. She triggers the outbreak as a containment protocol and locks every exit. The building itself decides you need to die. And even if you survive the zombies, the laser hallway kills 4 commandos in seconds. Trained soldiers with automatic weapons and body armor, sliced apart by the security system like it was bored. Here's the thing. In REC, the environment was just a building that happened to be locked. In Resident Evil, the environment is actively trying to murder you. The AI controls the doors, the defenses, the air supply. You're not fighting zombies. You're fighting architecture with a grudge. Your estimated survival time? 30 to 90 minutes. Which is generous, honestly. But at least you're stuck underground. The next movie puts you on a train doing 305 kilometers per hour with nowhere to run except the next car full of passengers who are about to have a very bad day. Train to Busan. Now take that same confined space nightmare and strap a rocket to it. Train to Busan puts you on a KTX bullet train doing 305 kilometers per hour with over 500 passengers and exactly 1 infected person who slipped through the doors at Seoul Station. You literally cannot leave. You're in a metal tube screaming across South Korea, and the only thing between you and a horde is a sliding glass door. Within 20 minutes of departure, that single infected passenger has turned an entire car. Within 90 minutes, the train has reached critical mass. The spread is so fast that your survival comes down to one question. Which car were you sitting in when this started? But here's the thing. The zombies aren't even the main problem. Human selfishness is. Characters in this film die because other passengers actively block them from reaching safety. One businessman literally barricades doors to protect himself while watching families get torn apart on the other side. Cool. That's also a thing that happened. The only survivors? A pregnant woman and a little girl. Not soldiers, not athletes. They made it because people around them chose cooperation over panic. Every selfish character in this film dies. Every single one. Your estimated survival time is 45 minutes to 2 hours. And honestly, most of that depends on whether the stranger next to you decides to help you or sacrifice you. But if you think a speeding train is chaotic, wait until the zombies go global. World War Z. Every movie we've talked about so far has been contained. A building, a house, a single bad night. World War Z throws that out the window and says, no, the entire planet is done. Billions infected within 30 to 40 days. Every major city gone. And these zombies are a different breed entirely. They don't shamble. They swarm. They pile on top of each other 15 bodies high to scale fortified walls like some kind of nightmare ant colony. Israel literally builds a massive wall around Jerusalem, and it holds for maybe a couple weeks before one single breach brings the whole thing down. Weeks of preparation, billions in resources, undone because somebody got a little too loud with a megaphone, which is, not ideal. But here's the interesting twist. These zombies are actually solvable. They're mechanically predictable. They avoid already infected hosts. They move in patterns. They respond to stimuli like biological machines. The answer isn't shooting them. It's treating the whole thing like a science problem. The catch? Figuring that out requires hopping between continents, accessing classified research facilities, and having the full backing of the United Nations. So, unless you happen to be Brad Brad Pitt with a UN escort helicopter, your odds of cracking the zombie code are 0. You're not surviving on smarts, you're surviving on access. Estimated survival, 3 to 6 weeks. But if you thought global scale was the scariest variable, wait until you see what happens when the zombies can actually sprint. 28 days later. Here's what makes this one terrifying. You don't get bitten and slowly turn over hours while your friends debate what to do. You get a single drop of infected blood in your eye, and you have 20 seconds. That's it. 20 seconds from normal human being to full-speed sprinting cannibal. Not shuffling, not groaning, sprinting. At you. With every ounce of energy a human body can produce. The rage virus spreads through blood and saliva only, which sounds manageable until you realize that killing an infected person at close range practically guarantees splash contact. Every fight is a coin flip. But here's where it gets interesting. These aren't zombies. They're infected humans. Still alive, still biological, still bound by the same rules as every other living organism, which means they need to eat. And since their only behavioral setting is uncontrollable violence, they're not exactly sitting down for balanced meals. Within 3 to 5 weeks, they starve to death. So the entire survival strategy shifts. You don't need to fight them. You don't need to cure them. You just need to hide long enough for biology to do its job. The problem is those first 5 to 7 days. UK urban centers collapsed almost immediately, turning every city into a death sprint. If you can survive that initial gauntlet, you theoretically win by doing absolutely nothing. Theoretically. Which brings us to what happens when humanity tries to move back in. 28 weeks later. This one's cruel. Not because of the zombies, not because of the violence, but because everyone already survived. 28 weeks? That's 7 months of hell, and they made it. The infected starved to death, the military swept in, and survivors moved into a quarantine zone in London to start rebuilding. Electricity, running water, something resembling hope. 7 months of earned survival, gone in 72 hours. Here's what happens. A man finds his wife alive in the quarantine zone. She was bitten during the first outbreak, but never turned. She's a carrier, immune to symptoms, but actively infectious. He doesn't know this. Nobody does. He kisses her, because of course he does, and that single act of love reignites the entire plague. The military response is immediate and simultaneously useless. They go from containment protocols to firebombing civilians in under 3 days. Too harsh for the survivors. Too late for the infected. The quarantine zone collapses like wet cardboard. But here's the part that actually matters. The final minutes of the film show infected crossing the English Channel into mainland Europe. The first outbreak practically wiped out the entire UK. The second one is heading for 7 billion. You can't plan for a threat you literally cannot detect. That's the real horror. Not the rage virus, not the military failures. A man who loved his wife and ended the world because of it. The rage virus turns people in seconds. You don't get a grace period. You get a kiss, and then it's over. But if you think a carrier you can't detect is bad, wait until the zombies can actually sprint at you from the moment they turn. Dawn of the Dead, 2004. This is the zombie survival fantasy. The one everybody pictures when they close their eyes and think, yeah, I could make it. A shopping mall, unlimited food, pharmacy on the second floor, clothing stores, furniture, entertainment. You could live like a king in there, and the 2004 remake actually takes that fantasy seriously. The survivor group of 10 doesn't just barricade the doors and hope for the best. They build an actual system. Daily food rotation schedules, weapon maintenance logs, shower timetables. They inventory everything. The mall has roughly a 3-month food supply for their group size, which is genuinely impressive. They establish a clear hierarchy, assign roles, and run the place like a small military outpost that happens to have a Cinnabon. Here's the problem. Outside, thousands of zombies are pressing against every entrance, and that number grows daily. Every day the herd gets bigger, the glass gets weaker, and the margin for error shrinks. The mall isn't a fortress, it's a fishbowl, and that's the tension nobody talks about. Discipline extends your life. Organization buys you weeks instead of days, but comfort breeds complacency. The moment you start feeling safe is the moment you stop checking the barricades. The breakout happens around day 3, which, for a group this organized, is almost embarrassing. Estimated survival sits at 3 to 7 days, potentially weeks if you maintain strict discipline and never, ever get comfortable. But if you think a mall is a rough place to hold out, wait until you see what happens when you try to survive in a farmhouse with 6 strangers who absolutely hate each other. Night of the Living Dead. This is the one that started everything, and it has the most depressing thesis of any zombie film ever made. George Romero put 7 strangers in an isolated Pennsylvania farmhouse for one night, just 12 hours. The zombies outside are slow, shuffling, really, maybe 100 of them. of them, and they go down with a single bullet to the head. The survivors board up the windows, secure the doors, and hunker down with firearms. On paper, this should be the most survivable scenario on this entire list, and every single person dies. Not because the zombies break through, because the people inside tear each other apart first. Power struggles over who's in charge, paranoia about who might be bitten, arguments about whether to stay upstairs or hide in the basement. The building holds, the people don't. Here's the thing. Romero wasn't making a monster movie. He was making a psychology experiment with zombies as set dressing. The real threat was never the dead walking around outside. It was the living screaming at each other inside. And the final scene, where the last survivor makes it through the entire night, only to get shot by a human militia at dawn, is basically Romero saying you were never going to make it. This film established the most important rule of the zombie genre. Humans are always the bigger threat. Every film on this list borrows that idea. Most of them just aren't brave enough to commit to it this hard. Your estimated survival time? 6 to 18 hours. Which is generous, because it assumes you're not stuck with people who'd rather fight you than the zombies. But if you think slow, shuffling undead are bad, wait until you see what happens when zombies get smart, organized, and start running Las Vegas like a kingdom, army of the dead. Here's something nobody talks about with this movie. The zombie apocalypse already happened, and humanity won. By the time the heist kicks off, Las Vegas has been walled off for roughly 6 years. The rest of the world moved on. People are living their lives, holding jobs, arguing about politics. The quarantine held. Society adapted. If you're anywhere outside that wall, your survival timeline is measured in years, not hours. So why does everyone die? Because people got greedy. The heist team walks into a quarantine zone crawling with thousands of zombies on a self-imposed 32-hour countdown before the government nukes the entire city, and somehow they're surprised when things go sideways. But here's where it gets complicated. These aren't your standard shuffling corpses. Zack Snyder introduced alpha zombies, intelligent apex predators that command hordes, solve problems, and hold grudges. Every traditional zombie survival tactic falls apart when the thing chasing you can think. The alphas don't just hunt. They strategize. They set traps. They mourn their dead, which is, not ideal when you just killed one of their leaders. The surviving team members make it almost to the end of that 32-hour window before everything collapses. Not because the quarantine failed, not because zombies breached the wall, because humans voluntarily walked back into the death zone for a pile of cash. Long-term survival in this world is genuinely achievable. The movie proves it for 6 straight years. The zombies aren't the problem. Somebody always wants to go back inside. But if you think intelligent zombies are the worst thing a bunker can produce, wait until you see what happens when scientists start experimenting on them underground. Day of the Dead. This is the one where Romero accidentally made the most hopeful zombie movie of all time. And I don't think he even meant to. The setup is almost comically secure. You've got a small group of survivors, maybe a dozen people, a mix of scientists and military personnel, living deep underground in an abandoned limestone mine converted into a full military bunker. We're talking serious depth here. Deeper than most subway systems, deeper than most bomb shelters, deeper than anywhere a shambling corpse is going to wander into by accident. But here's where it gets genuinely impressive. This isn't just a hole in the ground with canned beans. The facility has stockpiled supplies, functional infrastructure, generators, cold storage, medical equipment, actual livable conditions that work. The guaranteed provisions alone buy them real time, and the mine itself is massive enough to sustain operations long term. These people aren't scavenging, they're maintaining, and you can tell the bunker works because of what the characters argue about. They're not debating whether they'll starve. They're not planning desperate supply runs. They're having conversations about whether they should leave to find undiscovered islands. Islands. That's a luxury debate. That's people who are so stable underground that they're fantasizing about beach vacations. The world above, completely gone. Total infection. Zero chance of surface survival. Which means this bunker isn't a temporary solution. It's civilization's last functioning apartment, and the rent is paid. The only thing that can kill these people is each other, social collapse, military versus scientists, ego versus logic. If the group holds together, this facility sustains life indefinitely. If it doesn't, well, you've got a dozen stressed people with guns in a cave, but at least they had the option, because the next film on our list redefines what surviving even means. The Girl with All the Gifts. This one breaks the entire premise of our video. Every other film on this list asks, how long can you survive? This one asks, does it still count as surviving if you're not human anymore? Here's the setup. It's been 15 years since a fungal infection wiped out civilization. Not a virus, a fungus. And that distinction changes everything, because the spores are in the air. Every breath you take outside is a coin flip. Every breeze is a delivery system. You can't shoot spores. You can't outrun wind. Humanity is down to scattered groups numbering in the low thousands globally. There's a military research compound trying to develop a cure, and they've got about a 4-month window before resources run dry. The last hope is a group of hybrid children, kids who got infected but kept their intelligence. They're something new, part human, part fungal host. And here's where it gets complicated. The film's ending doesn't give you a cure. It gives you evolution. The hybrids don't save humanity. They replace it. The protagonist releases the spores across London, turning every remaining unprotected human, and the world becomes theirs. So your estimated survival time is technically indefinite as a hybrid, which is, not ideal. The zombies won. They just won through biology instead of violence. No dramatic last stand, no heroic sacrifice that turns the tide, just a species that adapted better than we did. The fungus didn't need to kill every human. It just needed to wait for one little girl to decide the future belonged to something else. Cheerful stuff. But at least the apocalypse here takes 15 years to play out. The next entry gives you about 4 days of comfort before everything falls apart. Dawn of the Dead, 1978. Here's the thing about the original Dawn of the Dead. The mall works. It actually, genuinely works. 4 survivors walk into a shopping mall with passive zombies shuffling around like confused shoppers on a Sunday afternoon, and they clear the place out, lock the doors, set up camp, and suddenly they're sitting on months of food, clothing, pharmaceuticals, and every luxury item you could ask for. The zombies outside? Barely a threat. These aren't sprinters. They're not problem solvers. They shamble around until something disturbs them, and if you leave them alone, they leave you alone. This is genuinely one of the most survivable zombie scenarios ever put on film, and for a while, the survivors live like kings, watching movies, trying on clothes, building a little domestic routine in the middle of the apocalypse. It's comfortable, it's sustainable, and that's exactly what kills them, because abundance is more dangerous than scarcity. When you're starving and terrified, every decision matters. You stay sharp, but when you've got a fully stocked department store and 0 immediate threats, you get bored. You get reckless. Roger gets bitten during a supply run that didn't need to happen. Then a biker gang rolls up, tears the barricades open, and lets the zombies flood in. Steven dies trying to defend a mall that was already lost. Peter and Fran barely escape by helicopter. Nobody inside needed to die. The defenses were solid, but complacency invited carelessness. And carelessness invited the bikers, and the bikers invited the dead, which is, the most human chain reaction imaginable. Estimated survival, a few weeks realistically, with strict discipline, potentially months. But discipline is the one thing a fully stocked mall actively destroys. But if you think complacency is a survival killer, wait until you see what happens when the zombie apocalypse meets a pub crawl gone horribly wrong. Shaun of the Dead. Here's the thing about Shaun of the Dead. It's a comedy. And because it's a comedy, people don't take the survival analysis seriously. That's a mistake. The comedy tone strips away all the action movie nonsense and shows you exactly how survivable a slow zombie outbreak really is. The film takes place over 48 hours in London. The protagonist is Shaun, a man whose greatest tactical achievement prior to the outbreak was remembering to buy flowers for his mum. His group of 5 has 0 training, 0 preparation, and 0 weapons beyond a cricket bat, and some vinyl records they didn't like, and most of them survive. Let that sink in. But the real survival lesson comes from one scene that should be required viewing for anyone building a zombie plan. Shaun and his group walk directly through a zombie herd by simply acting like zombies. Shuffling feet, dead eyes, arms out. The zombies don't even glance at them. That single technique, camouflage through imitation, is worth more than every gun, bunker, and barricade in every other film on this list combined. Their final holdout is the Winchester pub, which has food, drinks, and a rifle above the bar. Not exactly a military compound, but it works. And here's the kicker. The British military shows up and successfully contains the entire outbreak. The epilogue shows zombies doing manual labor, appearing on game shows, and being walked on leashes, which is, not ideal for the zombies. But for humans, life just continues. Ordinary people with 0 preparation survived a zombie apocalypse by being slightly observant. Estimated survival time is 2 to 3 days before military rescue, with weeks possible if you secure a decent pub. But But if you think that's a strong showing, wait until you see the film that turned zombie survival into a literal rulebook. Zombieland. Every other movie on this list treats the apocalypse like a problem to solve. Zombieland treats it like a lifestyle change. And honestly, that's why you'd survive the longest here. The setup is almost unfairly optimistic. 4 people travel across the country during an outbreak that's only about 2 months old, and not a single one of them dies to zombie contact. 0. The entire film. That alone puts it in a category no other zombie movie touches. But here's the thing. It's not luck. It's system. The famous rules for survival aren't individually brilliant. Cardio isn't exactly revolutionary tactical advice. But having a system at all gives you something most zombie survivors never get. Psychological structure. You're not making panicked decisions in the moment. You're following a framework. And frameworks keep people alive when instinct fails. The zombie population is fragmented by geography, dense in cities, practically non-existent in rural stretches. So survival becomes a routing problem, not a combat problem. Pick the right roads, avoid population centers, and you can drive for days without seeing a single infected. And that final scene at Pacific Playland proves it. The group doesn't hole up in some bunker or wait for rescue. They fight, they survive, and they drive off together. Still cracking jokes, still alive. That's the real answer to this entire video. You don't survive the zombie apocalypse by finding the perfect fortress or stockpiling enough ammunition. You survive by finding people you trust, staying adaptable, and keeping your sense of humor. The group that jokes together doesn't spiral into paranoia. The group that bonds doesn't fracture under pressure. Survival isn't a building, it's people. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.